So, folks, I'm sure that we're going to enjoy asking a few questions from our forum, and I'll ask the speakers to come and sit, leaving this chair for me. It's almost mind-boggling what's actually happened with meditation and mindfulness. It's an exponential growth that can just really leave us all reeling, wondering whether we've just got swept up in some great fashion that's going to pass just like a great big wave, or whether it's actually going to really impregnate the culture we're living in. So who'd like to ask a question of our speakers?
This is a thank you for Sorry. I gave birth almost 4 years ago, and I came to a mindfulness anxiety class over near Box Hill, and my baby was having a great time. I have to say that he is beautiful. He sits and meditates every day. He teaches everybody about his breathing. He listens to meditation music, and so does his 2-year-old son. So thank you very much. He was my calm birth baby, and even though I'm a bit of an anxious mum still, he has been a blessing, and thank you for your teachings. We're passing it on to the next generation, and they rock. Thank you.
Thank you for that heartfelt comment. I really wish I'd known about meditating with my young children.
I was really intrigued by a comment that was made by Janet when she was quoting the author of The Brain's Way of Healing, that the way to heal the mind is through the body. Most people think of meditation as a sort of still practice. Can you share something about, moving meditations or using the body, in a meditation practice?
Basically, what I am guiding children to do is to be intimately connected to their body. Basically, when we lead incredibly demanding, busy lives, and children do, children are caught in the kind of maelstrom that their parents are caught in. That's what I experience. And often there's a disassociation with the body. So what I do in every lesson is shoes off, starting with the feet. The words I use are creating a space between your feet to find the base. And that really is the base of 206 bones, 750 muscles. And ultimately the end point, the culmination of that is stillness. But before they get to stillness, they're exploring, feelings, tightening muscles, letting muscles go, feeling where their spine is centered, feeling grounded. And that, I find that a very effective preparation for stillness. And if you read Norman Doig's book, it's just fascinating, using entry points like the tongue to rewire damaged brains from strokes and car traumatic accidents, those kind of things. A man in South Africa that has allayed the onset of Parkinson's by mindful walking. And what I'm really interested with anyone I work with, and I have reverence for stillness meditation. I practice it myself, but it's also wonderful to develop the holistic awareness of checking in on your body, not just isolating the practice to once a day, twice a day, but that is the profound kind of rehearsal and preparation for living mindfully.
Can I just add something to that as well? And I would agree with everything that's been said. And there's a very interesting confluence between science and what the world's great wisdom traditions have said for a long time. For example, the understanding of the mind in the Vedic tradition, I think, is a lot more nuanced than our Western, largely one-dimensional view of the mind. And considering, for example, the word manas, which is a Sanskrit word from which our English word mind traces back. But that's the discursive mind. Its job is to be connected to the senses, to be engaged, to be bringing in present moment happenings around us and bringing it into the deeper aspects of mind, like buddhi is the term for which we get Buddha, an enlightened mind, that quiet intuitive, knowing, insightful mind, sort of knows without words in a sense. But when that sort of bit that's meant to be connected to the senses unhooks and is off flapping in the wind, we're not only disconnected from what's going on around us and who we're with and what we're doing, so it affects how we learn, how we communicate, but it's also off creating dramas and sagas and catastrophes about the future and reliving the past. So this coming to our senses is a really practical and important thing to do, because then that's sort of like the mind gets out of the way, as it were, but there's a deeper level of knowing that starts to come into the picture. So that connection to the senses is really crucial. But modern science is just using different language for this now, talking about default mind. So when we're not paying attention, that we go into default mode. So rumination in depression, default mode. Mind's just churning, talking, criticising, judging, etc. Anxiety, worrying and so on. Schizophrenia, autism, all of these executive functioning disorders are associated with an enormous amount of default mental activity and then disengagement from present moment sensory experience. As soon as the attention re-engages with the senses, like, back to the breath, back to the moment, back to listening, back to tasting, that default mental activity switches off. We might have a sense like, oh, I feel more clear-headed or I feel calmer and so on, but it switches off. And so this is modern neuroscience, as Ken was saying before, catching up to what has been known for a very, very long time. We're just using different language for it. So it's absolutely a practical kind of way. And the connection with the body and the senses is not like developing some, preoccupation with the body or an obsession with it. It's just reconnecting and actually just seeing it for what it is, like a really useful instrument. But that brings the mind into view in a totally different way to the way we normally think about mind. And so this is I just love the confluence between wisdom traditions and modern science and practice that are coming together in this way.
Yes. I'd like to say that it's obvious that yoga is extremely popular as well, and many people would say that we're actually talking about the same thing here when we talk about yoga. Pauline, did you want to add?
Yes, I'd like to add something. Thank you, Ruth. Just coming back to Dr. Mears' teaching, and we have to remember, I think Dr. Mears was quite a unique person and he thought things through from a slightly different perspective, and this hasn't been formalised in evidence-based, but what he talked about was in stillness, when we're actually resting the mind, we are activating a natural homeostatic mechanism which will bring into balance the two parts of the nervous system. Now, I really, really want to see this understood, from a broad spectrum. You talk a lot about the scientific side of things, Craig, and you're talking about using the body. But what Dr. Mears was saying was, look, we have within us the ability to bring our nervous system into balance when we rest our mind and allow that natural homeostatic mechanism to come into play.
That is what I think that is what happens when we connect with the present moment in that way.
Well, providing we're being still, it would be Mears' argument. Providing there's a stillness, then that mechanism can come into play. But if we're still using our mind, it's not going to happen.
It depends on what you mean by mind, and it depends on what you mean by using the mind. It depends on what you mean by resting the mind. So all of these things are considered. I suspect we're talking about the same thing and just looking at it in slightly different ways, because there is a stillness, a peacefulness, a calmness that comes through that connection with the senses in the moment. Even if the body's active, there's still a stillness underneath the activity.
But is it profound enough? Is it intensive enough? That's the question. That's what hasn't been studied.
Yes.
And it's a good question, I think.
So if we've got all these techniques, and there's a whole, it's so obvious now that there are thousands of techniques of meditation and mindfulness, how do we know what suits a given individual, or how do we look at what's going to help a particular person that we're attempting to assist, or what's the best way of starting with a person? Any comments?
I think need comes into the picture. I think people know what they need. There's a sense of, need. I need to find an answer to this situation, and something will intuitively draw people, I hope, to what's right for them at the time. Obviously, yoga is really beneficial and really popular and very accessible to a wide range of people because it uses the body. But to go deeper, they might have to look further.
And there may not be a but. What do you think, Kay?
I think it all depends on people's experience, and it's horses for courses, as what's come up in our talks tonight. Is for some people, they have such incredibly active minds to actually sit down and try to do that type of meditation is incredibly difficult for them, and they give up because they say, this doesn't work for me, this is stupid, it doesn't work. Where more movement meditations, and there are movement meditations, that can work for them to just get them somewhere along the line. It's just whatever, to me, it's whatever hooks somebody in.
That's right.
Whatever appeals to them, that goes, yeah, there's something in this for me, and I'm getting something from it, and then to go from there. And then they might, from that, go to more stiller type meditations, but it's whatever hooks people in.
I think there's a really important issue here of engaging with the person where they are, teaching the skills from that person where they are, and being flexible, not saying, no, there's one thing, got to start like this, let's get a raise and it's got to be like that. And it's because there are many, many different ways of engaging a person with the broader notion of to be aware, to be present, and so on. I think part of the problem too sometimes is when somebody sits down to practice and they discover how active and distracted the mind is, that sort of, for me, in teaching mindfulness, when somebody says, oh, I tried it this week, first week of a course, oh, it didn't work for me, that's gold. Like the next question is, so what did you notice? What did you become aware of? And then you've got the whole conversation opening up about non-judgmentality, just acceptance, just noticing, learning in a sense to be still in the observing without involvement of the moving thoughts and allowing it to just settle by itself rather than trying to turn ourselves into some kind of meditation wrestler where I'm going to get the mind and pin it on the mat, 1, 2, 3, it's out kind of thing, because the mind just bounces back all the time. So I think there's very often the stopping, it didn't work for me, is very often just the next steps in teaching it, and that's where the skill in teaching meditation, I think, needs to go the next step, and to learn from those experiences, which are not failures, but are just opportunities.
I think this is why personal contact and rapport is really crucial, and teaching is the essence. Teaching is what brings the results.
So we've got a comment from up there at the back.
I was very interested in your opening to this excellent forum. You said, Ruth, that perhaps for the person in the street, mindfulness is okay, and you were musing on the fact that meditation is now okay, and wondering with respect to the future, will secular spirituality be okay? And then you said that you had a disturbing picture of people sitting in rooms by themselves, potentially generating peace, while the world reels into distraction and destruction and other things. And you made the comment that many practice meditation without any reference to ethics and action. And I was just curious to put a question to yourself and to the panel. There's been a mention from several of the speakers about the wisdom traditions and the great contemplative traditions, and a lot of them have some considerable things to say about ethics and action, and I'm just interested in your viewpoint and the panel's viewpoint on whether you see in the future a need for a more explicit emphasis on ethics and action in relation to meditation practice.
I think it's fortunate that meditation tends to spiritualise people, because as we learn to sit or pay attention, whether it's moving or sitting, what starts to happen is that the roots of our consciousness start to emerge into awareness. And with those roots of consciousness, we start to realise that what's on the outside is on the inside, and we've got a world that is in sore danger at the moment. And what that says to me is that all of us are carrying that in our own process. and that what we need to be doing, and I think meditation leads us to that, is becoming more and more active in changing what needs to be changed. As we change it on the outside, we're changing it on the inside. As we change it on the inside, we're changing it on the outside. So I think there's a kind of natural correction available. Not everyone's going to use it, presumably, but I know it's there.
Craig, please go ahead.
I think it's a really interesting and important question. I see this unfolding in a few different ways. That it could be a group comes along for stress or anxiety, so learn mindfulness to help with something like that. And what often happens, without it necessarily being the explicit, objective of a course, is that very often after 1, 2, 3 weeks, and people are saying, and if they're being taught in this kind of way, I'm being less judgmental, I'm just noticing more, I'm just starting to soften my attitude to myself, a little bit kinder to myself, I'm not judging in the way I usually do, etc. And then very often, week 3, 4, people start to come back with examples about, I noticed somebody else was being very difficult at work the other day, and normally I would react in this kind of way, but I just noticed that really underneath all of that was just fear about what was going on, or I just noticed, I could just sort of say, oh, look, you're exactly where I am. I know how it feels to be there, and just not reacting or judging in the same kind of way. And there's this beautiful natural unfolding that comes with awareness in a broader sense of the word. That just happens by itself. So I think the ethics, the kind of connectedness is a natural unfolding of awareness. To make it explicit, it depends on where a person or a group is up to. If I stepped into the medical students' introductory lecture, or they step into their first tutorial on mindfulness, and I say, we're going to explore loving kindness and oneness with the universe, because we're all the one consciousness, and separation is illusion. And, so I'm not sure where that would go. No, I've got a good idea where that would go. And I don't think I would still be teaching at Monash University. But it's the group opens that up in their own time, and the facilitator draws the conversations and the insights out as they come from the group, not from the person telling it, this is what your objective should be. So I think that individuals and groups are ready for different things, and to be out of step with that, to take people beyond where they're up to, I'm not sure is actually necessarily helpful in a certain context. If people have turned up for a course on mindfulness, ethics, and, in a much broader kind of sense, then you're already with that conversation. So I think it's a stepping stone in development. And I think it needs to happen in its own organic way, and that the teacher is conscious and aware of that unfolding and works with the person to do that in a skillful way.
So is anybody on our panel in disagreement with that? So we don't actually need to address ethics, we don't need to address anything, it's going to come out of the meditation?
We certainly see that with the, those qualitative quotes from the students that you couldn't read. We get so much information from children and what they say is happening to them, that it's no curriculum that's been set out, or these are the things you have to learn and these are the things they have to do. It just starts happening, and they just start feeding that information back. And the first wave of data is that I feel calm, I feel more relaxed, and then comes the greater attention and focus, and then comes the understanding about what's happening in their minds, and I'm thinking bad thoughts, and I don't have to think bad thoughts if I don't want to. I can step back from them, and then comes the quotes about the emotional intelligence, and then we get a bit of kindness coming through. I'm kinder to myself. So it just seems to evolve. You don't have to say anything about it, it just evolves by itself.
I think people gain contentment, as I've emphasised a few times tonight, and I think contentment is much more important than superficial happiness. Happiness is very transient, but contentment, there's a deep contentment there, and I think that spreads out into the sorts of things we're talking about.
And I think that a really important dimension, which my work as a psychotherapist reveals to me, is that a lot of people are just deeply troubled. and that getting them to sit mindfully with that may be helpful, but what they frequently need is actually an active engagement with them about what's troubling them. And that can be done meditatively by using adaptations of what people call mindfulness, and we call the adaptation that we use grounding, because our experience is that the body connected through awareness with the outside world and with itself actually moves into a state of equilibrium. And in that equilibrium, it draws feelings into a state of balance and draws thinking into a state of balance. So what we frequently do with people who are really challenged in those sorts of ways is we teach them to get themselves grounded. So they start to feel upset and we get them to pay attention to their bodies. What are the sensations wherever they are? And we get them used to doing that. We also simultaneously get them to look at what's in their immediate vicinity, to reach out and touch things and feel it, to listen to the sounds around them, to taste and smell them. And I loved your photos with what you're getting the kids to do, because that's right in the same sort of area, although with adults we don't quite do it in the same way. And very quickly what starts to happen is that people move into a state of balance, and almost like a miracle, the problems that have been plaguing them start to dissolve away. But without the active engagement and the intent to engage with those sorts of things, sometimes we can just keep teaching them something that isn't having the impact that it needs to with people who are very disturbed.
Can I just at a point coming back to the ethics, I wouldn't want to communicate for a moment that the ethics and the values and so on are not relevant or important, because I actually think they're central, they're crucial. I just think the unfoldment of that needs to work in its own way. It'd be like if you said to me, oh, language, you know, it's the beauty and the profound meaning that Shakespeare expresses. That's what language is for. And I'd say, yes, absolutely. But when children are learning language, you've got to start with the letters and build it up to a word and put words in. And then in the fullness of time, you get the beauty and the expression and the profound meaning in the language. And I think it's like that, the building blocks that little children are learning. And it was absolutely beautiful to hear that description of those children engaging, but taking those building blocks and the basics in mindfulness, the basics in meditation, and then building that eventually fullness and the flourishing of values, but it's got to have a foundation to make sense, I think, otherwise it's a foreign thing.
So it sounds like there is actually a confidence that this isn't just a passing wave of enthusiasm for meditation, that it is actually going to have some kind of penetration into the whole culture. We had a question down the front here.
I'd like to say thank you to all of you. It's been an inspiring evening. My question is, once we've had the awakening and we're mindful and practiced meditation, I'm just curious to know, where do you see the level of human consciousness going?
Well, I think we've got to start with Yoda on this one.
What an amazing question. Human consciousness, in my experience, tends to dissolve. So instead of being very focused on individual thoughts and feelings and activities and that sort of thing, we start to become clearer and clearer. So that's particularly as meditation enables us to digest the remnants of what we haven't dealt with in our bodies. And experientially we become more and more transparent, more and more serene, more and more at one within ourselves and at one with other people and at one with the world around us. And I think the end result of that is what some of the ancients talk about as enlightenment and just being.
So Craig,
I don't know that that's any help. But
final comment, Craig?
I think you can look at that optimistically or pessimistically. I think that there's a momentum towards misery and totally being caught up in the world and distractedness and kids living their life virtually off a screen and not connecting. There's all of this which has got quite a momentum, and at the same time we're watching this extraordinary things happening on many different levels. And so there's great room for optimism, but we are turning the Titanic at the moment, and it's going to take quite a while to turn. I mean, we're seeing this happening, but it's going to take a lot of work and effort. And that process, I think, is going to be, when I started at Monash, I felt this was generational. This is not short-term work, and we're not there yet. No way do I think, but I think that there's great room for optimism.
Thank you. Now, much as I'm tempted to keep this going until midnight, I'm getting different signals from different people, but I'm going to take the stand and say it's time. And I wanted to really thank you all for your generous gift of your time and your experience and your wisdom. Thank you for coming. I'm sure you can see from the engagement that you've generated from our audience how much they've appreciated all your contributions. I'd like to thank the audience for coming, members of Meditation Association of Australia and their friends, and those of you who just came because you thought it sounded interesting. And a reminder that we're all advocates for mindfulness and meditation, all of us, and it's clear that one way we can contribute meaningfully to our society and the difficulties it faces in our current time is to introduce and support as many people as possible to meditation. In conclusion, a particular thank you to our organiser, Paul Majewski, and to our guide, Stephen Penman, and all the other volunteers who assisted this evening, and the staff of Deakin Edge. Thank you all. Happy meditating.